Welcome to Sollu Kaburz podcast, and it is this election time and it's election series. We already done one with Assam, and now we move on to Tamil Nadu. A very, very important election, especially from down south, in the context of the national parties are hell bent in getting their foot into the southern politics and have their mark made. I believe a little bit of toe, if you can call it, has been made into Telangana by the BJP. Congress and BJP are the stalwarts in Karnataka, but Tamil Nadu and Kerala are kind of what you can call the GABA of Indian politics. The way India breached GABA, the national parties are hoping to breach the southern GABA of India. And in that context, we're going to talk all things Tamil Nadu politics and elections. For that, with me is one of my favorite political analysts, Alok Prasanna Kumar. Thank you very much, sir, for joining second time on the podcast. Thank you very much again.
My pleasure, Najeeb. Always a pleasure to be on your podcast.
When we talk about the upcoming Tamil Nadu election, right, there is something different other than the usual Anna DMK versus DMK angle, right? Primarily, nobody even has anything to say about the elections of the previous times. But this time, there seems to be something different afoot. Do you feel the same way, or is it the usual?
One thing I think we have to keep in mind with Tamil Nadu election, and it's something that a lot of guests on the Ganatantra podcast also pointed out to us, is that it's never just DMK versus AIDMK. They are both at the head of large coalitions.
Sure.
We automatically, in the context of Kerala, we assume coalition versus coalition, the left coalition and the Congress coalition, and somehow in popular imagination, Tamil Nadu politics is DMK versus AIDMK. Now, they are by far the largest parties. Not to say they're not important, but they are in a coalition. And I was just looking at the members of the coalition just before we started the podcast, and now of course, it's like AIDMK is formally part of the NDA. But let's not forget that a couple of decades ago, it was DMK which was part of the NDA. And AIDMK had joined up with the Congress to bring them down. See, the NDA is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 parties, at least one seat each. And the Secular Progressive Alliance is 3, 6, 9, 12, 13 parties with one seat each. These are sizable coalitions. I mean, obviously, the more than 170 seats in each coalition is being fought by the AIDMK and DMK. But these are not trivial coalitions. It's not as if you're doing someone a favor by getting them into the mix, because what a lot of people pointed out, the people who have studied this have pointed out, is that both parties look for alliance partners who add to the vote. They are looking for alliance partners who, because say Tamil Nadu is not like very clearly X caste or group dominates in one part of the state and Y in another group. Maybe slightly more dominant in some districts here and there, but unlike, let's say, Karnataka, where you can clearly tell that the south is largely Vokkaliga dominated and the north is largely Lingayat dominated, and you will find Vokkaliga and Lingayat communities in either place, but not in such sizable numbers where we can carry an election for them. So I think there are dominant castes in Tamil Nadu, but no one party can say all the dominant castes are only with us. At least that's what it seems to be. So you need to create coalitions of castes. And this was explained to us in the context of the Viduthalai Chirataigal Kachi, the VCK, which is a Dalit movement turned into a party. And at least in the context of the 2019 Lok Sabha elections, DMK put in a lot of effort to get not just VCK voters to vote for DMK, but also DMK's voters were largely among the higher castes than the VCK's voters were largely Dalit, to vote for Dalit candidates. So which is why VCK also has 2 MPs who, if they had fought on their own, it's unlikely that they may have been able to win in Lok Sabha elections. It's possible they might have won in, say, assembly elections. So the starting point I think we have to remember is that unlike the 2 northern southern states, which is Karnataka, the 3 northern states, Karnataka, Andhra, and Telangana. Kerala and Tamil Nadu, it tends to be coalition versus coalition. And when we think of coalition versus coalition, we have to sort of think of who are parts of the coalition and how that sort of defines the identity of the coalition.
So
So you do.
what you're saying is basically like, for example, in Andhra, like the Telugu Desam party is basically a Kama backed party, and
Yeah,
YSSP is basically a Reddy backed party. There is no such
yeah,
caste backing in Tamil Nadu's the big guns of Tamil Nadu, right? DMK and NMK is what you're trying to get to.
yeah. I mean, yes, there are of course Tevars, Nadars, and
Hmm.
others who tend to back one party or the other, but it's not necessarily to say they are the only ones
Yeah.
who are dominant in that party. Like, for instance, like BJP in Karnataka, for instance, is considered more of a Lingayat, was considered more of a Lingayat party till recently, when its identity is also undergoing change.
Sure.
And the JDS is considered very much a Vokkaliga party,
Hmm.
and these days only a Vokkaliga party.
Sure.
So, which is where, so that kind of, but you do have parties which are backed by specific castes. You do
Hmm.
have the MDMK, which is led by Vaiko. You have the DMDK, which is led by famous captain. What's his name? I'm
Vijay
totally blanking out on that. Captain Vijay Kant. These are castes. These are parties which are based on specific castes, taking trying to assert themselves, but they aren't. DMDK and MDMK on their own strength will never be able to form it. What do you call a government on their own?
Sure.
So which is where I think the nature of this is kind of different. Its origins have to do with the fact that Tamil Nadu politics has been about Brahmins versus the rest for
Yeah.
the longest time, and that was the origins of the Dravidian movement, which was about self-respect. It was about claiming space
Hmm.
For non-Brahmins in the erstwhile Madras state, or at least the What is now Tamil Nadu in part of Madras state. And ever since the Congress lost in the 60s, I'd like to say, no central party has ever been able to lead a coalition, be the largest
It's
party in the
one of those
coalition.
it's one of those unique states, right, where the only state for the past 50 years that is being ruled by a regional party, right? Maybe some exceptions somewhere in the northeast, I don't know, but in a state more
Right.
than a population of 4 or 5 crores, right? uh,
Yeah,
for the
easily.
past 50 years, this is the only state.
Right.
What is unique about it? What differentiates from them? Is it like they had this Tamil identity movement right before it goes back way back before independence, and that is that how
Yeah.
is that how the
Yeah,
roots
I
of
think
this?
so. Yes. Yeah, I think we have to understand that the Justice Party movement and all of that,
Mm,
the self-respect movement, all of that dates much prior to the independence,
mm,
prior to independence, and uh, in a sense, what is today Tamil Nadu is has more or less had the same borders for the longest period of time. Andhra was carved out of 3 or 4 different entities,
mm,
Karnataka out of 5 entities, Kerala had to be put together again from different entities,
yeah.
whereas what is now Tamil Nadu has been more or less politically cohesive for a long period of time. Um, we also and in a sense, the I guess you have to look at the the deeper sociological implications of this kind of political stability and how it manifests itself in the way in which what kind of political movements have come across. And it's let's also admit the fact that most major North Indian based empires
Mm,
did not get all the way to the south.
yeah.
So there is that cultural, social,
Isolation.
historical set of difference. Yeah, not I would say isolation,
Yeah, yeah.
because this is one of those parts of the country which was connected to the world
Sure,
since
sure.
forever, right? In terms of it wasn't. Let's not call it isolation, because
Okay.
isolation means something else.
Yeah, yeah,
It wasn't part of, say, the North Indian imagination, if you want to call
yeah.
it. If you go all the way back to the Mughal Empire and prior to that, they may have done occasional raids, collected tribute, but you find almost no instance. I think apart from the Marathas and then the British, you don't find that North Indian empires sort of extending. They do
Mm,
extend all the way to North Karnataka and what is now
mm,
Andhra, and a little
yeah.
bit to South Karnataka as well, but almost never all the way down to Kerala and Tamil Nadu. So they have retained a certain kind of
None of
distinctive character.
none of those sultans and khans reached
Yeah,
down. Yeah,
they never
yeah.
reached. I mean, you could even say even all the way back to the Mauryan Empire, right?
Mm, yeah.
It was kind of different,
Mm,
and culturally also. it's very interesting, and this pattern comes up again and again and again and again in very different contexts, and nobody's been able to give me a good single reason why.
Okay.
When you look at women's empowerment,
Hmm.
whether women, it's just the most basic, not even literacy, right? Are
Yeah.
women veiled or not?
Hmm.
You will find North and West India is very different from South and East India. When you look at women's employment, North and West India are very different from South and East India. Diet, North and West India are wheat, South and East India are rice.
Hmm.
Languages, North and West India are your so-called Indian Indo-Aryan languages. South and East India are a mix of Dravidian and other languages. So
Hmm.
you find that there is this consistent difference between the South and the East of India, along the East Coast up to Bengal and the Northeast. That seems very different from the
Yeah.
Northwest. It's a very interesting pattern, including vegetarianism.
Hmm.
The percentage of vegetarians decreases as you go further south and further east
Yes.
from, say, Delhi,
Yes.
approximately, right?
Yes.
And Kashmir being the exception for the north.
Yeah.
So therefore, I think we have to understand that it's that Tamil Nadu's exceptionalism in some way
Hmm.
is tied to deeper historical cultural factors. So and even the AIDMK and DMK were split off from a main part,
Yes.
right? The Dravida Kalagar movement. So we have to understand Tamil Nadu politics as a whole
Hmm.
in its own right, and not just as fitting somewhere into the national political scenario or the national political narrative.
Sure.
In that, I would say the same is true of Kerala also.
Hmm.
Even though there are quote unquote national parties like Congress, CPM, BJP in play, I do think understanding Kerala's politics requires. I mean, your national mainstream politics will not help you understand Kerala politics. That
Sure.
a Congress may ally with a CPI, CPM for West Bengal elections, but there's no question of allying with them for Kerala. And that difference, I think, between West Bengal and Kerala doesn't have so much to do with the communist parties themselves, but the fact of purely local factors in how the party has evolved in different ways in responding to local needs and local, pressures and so on. So that way, I think national parties are going like whatever makes them national may also make them irrelevant in Tamil.
Yeah, sure. Do you think there is some sort of a demigod effect in Tamil Nadu politics, in the sense that only two parties with figures of high name and stature have ruled ever since, right? It's MGR, and it's been Karunanidhi, and then it's Jayalalitha and Karunanidhi. Is it fair to say that there was ever no room ever given to any new leader, or is it just the same case with every state and there's nothing different about Tamil Nadu?
Karnataka between 2009 and 2013, 2008 and 2013 had three chief ministers, right? All from the same party. If you take out short-term CMs like MGR's wife, Tamil Nadu between 1970, I think.
Somewhere there.
1970 all the way to 2017 when Jayalalitha passed away, had three CMs.
Yes.
Okay, we're talking about ignoring like say CMs who served basically a year. This OPS and others, because of the MGR's wife who was like for a CM for a brief while. If we take out such exceptions like that, realistically, I think has had three CMs. And I can't think of another state where that has happened.
I mean, I'm a 90s kid. I the only names I know is Karunanidhi and Jayalalitha. I mean, there is just
correct, right?
There's no room.
And even if you're a 70s kid, you would have known at most MGR. MGR, Karunanidhi, MGR, and Jayalalitha. So you have three people who have between them been CMs of the state. Even though, and they have exchanged power. It's not like in Bihar where the Janata Dal under Lalu Yadav and Rabri Devi ruled for about 15 years consecutively. 15, almost 20 years actually, consecutively. And then it was Nitish Kumar, who again has now ruled for 16 years now, consecutively. So you've had those CMs who have ruled at a stretch. You've had parties who have ruled at a stretch who have won this thing. But the way in which I think in Tamil Nadu you've had only three people be CMs over a 40-year period or so, approximately, I think is incomparable in any other state in India. And I
why
think
do you think so?
uh, it's hard to say exactly why.
Hmm.
Um, One is, of course, the fact that DMK is a cadre-based party.
Hmm.
It has a strong cadre, and look, in a sense, it explains at least why DMK sort of has survived this long.
Sure.
And Karnanidhi is somebody who has sort of been with the party almost since the very inception, since it's been there, and
Hmm.
now Stalin has taken over. Uh, but also, I think it's a unique set of factors which I don't think are replicable in any way. It is
Hmm.
just a set of things coming together. One of the things that the DMK did was that how closely it tied itself to the film industry.
Hmm.
And it didn't tie itself into the film industry as a let's get an actor to be on our thing, but even MGR himself was part of the movement before he became a big star.
Sure.
If for those of you who have seen the film Irover, it sort of neatly tracks how they were friends even before,
Hmm.
say, MGR became such a big star, and his he was steeped in the Dravidian movement before he became a big star, and he used his star power to help the movement.
Hmm.
Initially, realized that he was not being given as much importance, and then stepped away to sort of form his own movement and his own party. And it maybe the AIDMK is not as structured as a DMK when it comes to being a cadre-based party,
Yeah.
but the charisma of the leaders, the fact that both Jayalalitha and MGR were two extraordinarily charismatic people.
Hmm.
You will, I mean, if someone were to write a proper history of India's CMs and PMs, you will find that there are a mix of people. There are people who are solid party organization men and
Sure.
women. Very much fewer women, but a lot more men who sort of worked their way up to the top and became what they were. Um, and then there have been these supreme charismatic characters who have created their own movement.
Hmm.
In the sense of like an NTR
Yeah. Andhra.
in Andhra,
Hmm.
like likewise in MGR,
Yeah.
and I would say even to an extent Indira Gandhi, because she literally took the Congress out of the old syndicate's hand
Hmm.
and created it. And maybe in a few years we'll realize that's what Narendra Modi also did. His trajectory was to use that charisma to literally wrench the BJP out of Advani and others' hands and create his
Sure.
own BJP in his own image. So, whereas a Jyoti Basu was very much a party man, he rose up into the ranks of the party. He
Hmm.
wasn't like, he didn't create the CPM. The CPM came to power over a period of time with disenchantment of the Congress and then created the machine which allowed it to survive. So we can, and a Nitish is a very interesting case. Actually, he doesn't fit either mold
Hmm.
very easily because he's not someone who commands the masses, but has somehow created this other kind of charisma of being a quiet and able administrator without having come up the ranks of his own party or anything like that. So
Yeah.
we leave Nitish out for a second. But if you take
I mean,
someone like,
speak of charisma, speak of Tamil Nadu, right? Like
yeah, it is, right?
Rajnikant and Ajit has this mass following. That I mean, I'm talking about actors, but that kind of start. I mean,
Yeah,
politicians also carry that sort of
correct.
stardom vibes, if you
Yes,
may, right?
yes. And we have to sort of understand that people think that movie stars do well, but in fact, these are the three exceptions. To be very honest,
Mm, exactly.
if you look at an NTR or an MGR or a Jayalalitha, they're actually exceptions to the idea that somehow movie stars have some sort of a natural advantage.
Nah.
Chiranjeevi's gotten nowhere. Ambarish did reasonably well, but within a party framework and a party,
Mm,
the Congress party in this
mm,
thing. Dr. Rajkumar absolutely refused to come into politics
yeah.
post the 60s. Um, in Kerala, none of the film stars have any pull politically, even though, I mean, come on, a Mammootty or a Mohanlal is huge, right,
Yeah.
in every respect, but they don't get anywhere. Likewise, even in Tamil Nadu, Rajnikant has like dilly-dallied, and maybe for good reason, because he
Good.
knows
Yeah.
what it takes to run a political party. Maybe he just doesn't have it. And Vijay Kant,
Got
the
got
MDK is not going anywhere.
got himself into hospital to get himself out of politics.
Well,
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I know,
Yeah.
probably, and good luck to Kamal Hassan. But
Yeah.
I'm sure apparently the Makkal Nidhi Mayam is fighting in 141 seats.
Mm.
Good luck to them to retain deposits in all
Chewing
141
more
seats.
than it can, do you think? Or biting more than it more it can chew,
Biting off more than it can chew,
Yeah.
because
I mean,
it's not just having that charisma, right? It's not
yeah.
just having that charisma. It's not just saying this is my ideology, because at the end of the day, you need that people around you who are supreme organizers,
Mm.
somebody who can sort of make sure that you have a worker in every single poll booth who can
Sure.
manage your voters, whatever. Um, and if you're in Tamil Nadu politics, why would you choose the M&M when you have the DMK and AIDMK to choose between?
Yeah.
Right? They probably share most of the same ideology. You may dislike the BJP or you may not dislike the BJP, so you'll be okay with like either of the parties.
Yeah.
So if you are a talented political worker with good organizational skills at whatever level,
Yeah.
uh, you'd rather go where there is a better chance of being in power. Either the AIDMK being actually in power right now, or the DMK, which by all accounts
Yeah.
looks to be able to
Sure.
come to power. I mean, even Enram has predicted like almost a clean sweep.
Yeah.
I think. I mean, I don't know
It's
how
like
accurate it is, but
Democratic and Republican of US. It's just you can't like there might be green
yeah,
parties, but like come
there
on.
might be, but you're not going to miss. So,
Sure.
if you have a good solid base with a certain caste, with a certain group, and a certain region, uh, you can just choose between the alliances themselves.
Sure.
So there is very little space, I think, to create an entirely different structure,
Hmm.
an entirely different set of political parties. And no matter how good the actor is, how popular they may be, how charismatic they are, and well,
Yeah.
charisma is good, but it'll never replace the hard-nosed organizational work
Sure.
that needs to go in to create a political party.
Yeah.
And what is it that you're offering that is fundamentally different? And
Mm.
see, we have seen that the age of political entrepreneurship is not over in India. Whatever one's views about the Aam Aadmi Party maybe, they saw that there was an exhaustion with
Yeah.
Congress and BJP in Delhi, and there is something fresh that they could offer
Mm.
to people. Whether now they fully delivered on it or not is up to
Different.
voters and history to decide.
Yeah.
But when you think that everything is like between these two guys only where space is, but it takes a certain kind of smart political entrepreneur,
Mm.
as the term goes, to identify if there is a gap.
Mm.
And in this gap, I can say I am the one who's providing a different kind of representation, politics, services, or whatever it is. So I think in that sense, it's possible, but I'm not so sure that I see either, for that matter, TTV Dinakaran,
Sure.
or for that matter, Kamal Hassan offering anything which the DMK or the IDMK do.
Yeah. And explain to me how this alternate since I told you I'm a 90s kid. Another thing I
Hmm.
remember of Tamil Nadu politics is either this party and that party. There's always a switch
Yeah,
every election, and it's not some marginal victory. It's just like a massive swing of votes, and there has never been a hung assembly ever, right? So
yeah,
what have you ever heard any solid explanation to this? I mean, obviously they broke that pattern in 2016. We'll come to that, but generally,
yeah,
ever since 1989, I guess.
yeah. Again, as I said, it's because these are two what do you say, two alliances fighting.
Mm,
It's not just two individual parties.
yeah.
And I suppose even a marginal shift in votes is
Mm,
enough to give you a clean sweep.
sure.
In Karnataka, for instance, where you have three major parties, a shift in votes may not necessarily go from BJP just to Congress. It may go to
Mm,
BJP and JDS and Congress. A shift out of JDS may go from Congress to BJP and likewise.
sure.
In a reasonably three-cornered fight. So that way, a small shift, perhaps, you could win like 45% of the
Popular
vote
word. Mm,
and popular vote and win 200 seats,
yeah.
because at the end of the day, you only need one vote more, and if you're consistently out, and again, because as we said, there's no like part, you can't easily divide Tamil Nadu into places where certain castes and groups dominate,
Mm,
right? And that could complicate things. If like,
sure.
for instance, if you take Karnataka, where if the Vokaliga vote stays firm to the Congress, and the Lingayat vote switches to them, switches to the BJP, you might not
Mm,
lose that much of
Sure.
it because you're going to win certain seats in South Karnataka anyway.
Yeah.
Likewise with the BJP. I don't think the BJP has ever managed to win the popular vote in Karnataka. BJP and its allies have not managed to win the popular vote in Karnataka, even though it's formed the government twice so far.
Okay.
So the Congress has never, because its votes are spread across the state.
Sure.
It tends to win fewer seats. So just to draw a comparative example, whereas the fact that both parties are competing in all parts of the state. They may be slightly stronger, slightly strong, less strong there, but they're competing across the state. So when a switch of 5% happens, it probably tends to happen across the states, not like this. Some regions went dramatically in favor.
Yeah.
I guess that's a more reasonable explanation as to why it's a complete sweep one way or the other. 2016, as you mentioned, was the exception.
Yeah.
And I think part of that exception had to do with the state in which the DMK itself was. DMK suffered this massive setback in the 2014 elections.
Yeah.
And also the fact that it was primarily implicated in the 2G scam. And there was like this bizarre refusal to acknowledge and address what they felt was issue. I mean, of course, post that everyone's gotten acquitted, we found that there was no 2D scam, which is either the greatest act of national gaslighting, okay, or it is one of the biggest prosecution failures in this country.
Right.
I mean, and it's a tragedy that everyone's just moved on, saying, yeah, they'll file appeal, whatever. But I think just to take the 2G scams, if there is a Tamilnadu connection, the Supreme Court literally, if we have to use a cricket metaphor, had bowled a nice, big, juicy full toss to the CBI to say your entire job is to just make connection of ball with bat and it's going to go for a 6. The CBI missed that. Okay. The CBI basically missed that. So I think that is something that, and like we've also sort of now seen the repercussions of that. Nobody sees the DMK as the quote unquote corrupt party. It's now seen as the AIDMK because you now had 10 years of rule or misrule, or however you want to call it, of this party. And there is it got afflicted by, I guess, what you call the lame duck syndrome, where I guess at some level when they felt that okay, definitely we're not going to be able to reproduce this for 3 years or the third time. Definitely it's not going to happen with Jayalalitha. And of course, once she passed away, parties split into these factions and everyone's at each other's throats, and perhaps governance has taken a hit and has probably given the AIDMK is a much worse reputation now.
Sure.
But if we look at 2016, perhaps let's also not take away credit from Jayalalitha. She had a very strong and very committed women vote base, who she did design a lot of schemes for. She did ensure that the welfare provisions, and welfare is a kind of important aspect of Tamil Nadu politics, which unfortunately gets dismissed as freebies.
Yeah. I remember used to laugh in my school days. Oh, they're giving free TVs, free computers, free cycles, but cookers.
Yeah, correct. And there's this whole idea that you shouldn't be giving goods free to people. I mean, we've come now to the extent where a lot of economists are saying just give free money to people.
Yeah.
Right. All the way from we should create the.
We have created a new word for it: universal basic income.
Universal basic income, right? So, and each of these, let's also not forget the fact that these weren't like desperate politicians trying to keep favor with an unhappy electorate. There's a lovely story, and I love telling this story to everyone. We know the midday meal scheme started in Tamil Nadu.
Yeah.
Kamraj had introduced it, and MGR was the one who made it statewide. Right? MGR said it will be extended. Kamraj has started it in a few places, I think in and around Chennai. MGR said it's going to happen across the entire state. Every one of his bureaucrats told him it will fail. Don't do it. He said, I don't care. I'm doing it. Then national government said, this is a waste of rice. This is a waste of money. Why are you doing it? He said, I'll do it. Then World Bank got into the end and said, what a waste of money, what a waste of time. You should not be doing. He said, I'll still do it. First 2 years, the scheme struggled badly. All right, let's be very clear about it. It wasn't an immediate success.
Sure.
But MGR said, look, I know what the people want. I am a leader who's a mass leader for a good reason, not just because I'm an actor. I know what people's aspirations are. I know what their hopes are. I know what they look for, and I know how valuable ensuring that their kids get a meal in school is for them. I don't, if you tell me that there are 100 problems, I have no issue with you telling me there are 100 problems. You tell me how to fix it, I will fix it. And the bureaucrats caught this sentiment. They also like, okay, fine, we'll tell you how to fix it. 2 or 3 years when this scheme had been introduced, as used to happen then,
Sure.
chief ministers would go and make the planning commission deputy chair, mostly because planning commission was their annadata and they had to give money and they had to do their salams to the whole lot. And then there, the planning commission deputy chairman happened to be Manmohan Singh.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, right. So this was under the Rajiv Gandhi government, and he had been appointed planning commission deputy chairman. And meeting had been scheduled with CM of Tamil Nadu, MGR. MGR walked in and ordered coffee, and coffee was brought in. They exchanged pleasantries for 5 minutes, and once settled down, so Manmohan Singh said, right, now let's talk about welfare expenditure in Tamil Nadu. MGR put his coffee cup down, got up and walked out. His bureaucrats were like, what happened? And they're like, oh, if he's gone, we have to go. So they also like walked out. Manmohan Singh is sitting there and going, what just happened here? What did I do? What did I say? And this was reflective of the fact that MGR had said, I know what the people want, right? I'm not just doing this as an election gimmick. I know it'll help me in the election, electorally or whatever. I know what the people want. You bureaucrats sitting in Delhi, don't tell me what I should be doing as chief minister. And this is an account written by someone who was actually there at the meeting.
Sure.
So it's very evocative in terms of like the kind of the bureaucrats. His own bureaucrats were shocked that MGR sort of basically defied Manmohan Singh and said, I don't care. I'm going to walk out of this meeting. So in that sense, they understood that the purpose of the state, it's a larger political philosophy. The purpose of the state is not just this idea that you create rules and enforce rules and people will do whatever.
Sure.
But in a country with as many inequalities, as much disparities, as much poverty as India, the state has to take a very active role in ensuring that people build up their capabilities and abilities and so on to be able to achieve their full potential, right? And this is something that scholars, later scholars like Martin Nussbaum and Amartya Sen later put it to us in more palatable terms and won Nobel Peace Prize and whatnot.
Sure.
But MGR, and I'm not just saying only MGR, there are others who realized this early on, right? And it takes a state level politician to really know what people want and how to get it to them. At the national level, you're only thinking of in big numbers. You're not so much involved with very particular policies. So, which is where I think welfare is a fundamental way in which it's part of the politics, and not in like a bad way, like in a good way.
Yeah.
Because even if you take something like, I think there was a recent promise that women will get washing machines. I forget if the DMK said it or ADMK said it, or one said and never said, I will also give washing machines. Again, as per usual, the rich privileged people on Twitter are going, washing machine, what do you do with washing machine? What we don't understand is that all these devices save so much labor for women, right? Because in a sense, in our deeply patriarchal society, we still have yet to unlock the full potential of the mechanization of the kitchen,
sure,
or the mechanization of domestic duties that are imposed upon women. And now this is a chance for women to outsource a lot of their labor to the devices, or even get the men to start using it.
Sure.
And giving themselves more free time to,
be
either go
productive
find
in
work,
something else.
or to be productive and something else, or do find something else. So it's in a sense that welfare is in fact allowing that woman who gets this washing machine to find new aspects of herself and to build more capabilities and so on. So which is why we shouldn't just see these as handouts. These aren't just handouts in the sense that they're instantly communicated and gone. I mean, if you take a fan, the sweltering heat of Tamil Nadu, a fan is a big thing to have. If you're living in a slum with poor ventilation, a fan is a lovely thing to have. And finally, here's you might say that then what about cable connections? I'm like, why shouldn't the poor people have entertainment? Why should we assume that entertainment is a luxury and not something essential to us being humans, right?
Sure.
We need to find those common grounds culture. We need to be able to access culture. That's what's part of what makes us human,
Existence.
and not just
Yeah.
it's not just a mere animal life. If we're talking about a human life,
Yeah.
so in that way, I think when we see these, when we stop seeing a lot of these promises as just um, welfare is or handouts and so on, you'll understand that these are all things which sort of appeal to people for the reason that allows them to lead more fulfilling lives.
Sure.
It allows them to lead more fulfilling lives, more productive lives, and makes them, maybe you don't, maybe the better way is to spend 40 years to try and address deep structural inequalities. Let's be honest, nobody's getting it done in a generation. Nobody's getting it done in 5 years, that's for sure.
Sure.
Right? So, and those things is not something that you can't necessarily campaign on for an election to say, I will hypothetically reduce India's Gini coefficient to make it more equal. You can't.
Yeah.
You can only sort of move it forward until like you get there at some point of time. So in that sense, we should stop seeing this. This is just handouts or some derogatory thing, but say that this is essentially part of the kind of welfare that the state should work for. And if this is something that the state can provide, and if it's sufficiently well targeted and reaches the right people, sure, go for it. Why not? And it shouldn't be seen that the state's job is to give people food grains and tell them that's it, now eat and be happy. That's not the approach.
Let's not get started on how we upper class, especially in Indian upper class, think what is appropriate for poor people to enjoy and what not. I mean,
exactly.
Very great example and recent example is when those farmers in the farmers protest was eating pizza. People were like, I'm like, what? Why? Like, what is the outrage about? It's that's weird. So, tell me something. What makes you say that DMK is out of that shadow of 2G scam right now? What makes you say that?
I think in a sense that
did the time heal everything?
Not just the time, but the fact that they got acquitted.
Yeah.
All of them got acquitted, right?
Sure.
I mean, this wasn't it wasn't like an acquittal where you could say something suspicious about this. The judge OP Sani has delivered a supremely well-reasoned verdict.
Sure.
He has looked at every piece of evidence. It's detailed. And he has said, I don't find a scam here. Where is the scam? Show me the scam. You have failed to prove the scam. Sure. You can say that, yes, the prosecution failed. And you should ask tough questions of the prosecution. You said you went to town tom-tomming the fact that this is a 2G scam, they've unearthed it, this is 30,000 crore or 100,000 crore or whatever it is. And here's the surprising thing. People may believe that there is a scam, but feel that these guys are unnecessarily prosecuted for. Right? Both the things can exist in a lot of people's minds. They may feel that even Jayalalitha went to jail, right?
Yeah.
After her prosecution. It didn't necessarily mean people instantly thought of her as a bad person. They may have increased sympathy that, after all these years, Papa, she has to go to jail, right? That kind of a way. So people's reactions to a lot of these things are not neat binaries that, they're innocent or they're guilty. People may feel, they're guilty, but should we keep holding it against them? Or, they may have done something bad, but should we still hold it against? And time gives you perspective. You don't necessarily mean that you think that what was once terrible is now okay. It's just that you may have a more nuanced perspective on it. You may say that, okay, maybe they may have been like that, but I am faced with corruption that touches me. The 2G scam at the end of the day didn't touch any one of us individually.
Yep.
Right. Yep. Even if you take the case of the prosecution at face value, it may have eventually affected us at some point of time indirectly, maybe somewhere with an increase in 2G call rates or whatever it was. We didn't feel that sting of not getting the money which we were supposed to get.
Yeah.
Or have to take money out of our pockets and to give someone.
Sure.
Maybe the corruption that is associated with the AIDMK, with the kind of your local leaders running roughshod over things. Maybe that's what stings. And we have to also perhaps use this to understand maybe what's happening in Bengal. That at the end of the day, people still feel the sting of having to deal with the TMC's local dadas or whatever it is. And if somebody comes along and says you will never have to deal with the dada again, you don't care if they're Hindu, non-Hindu, Hindutva, non-Hindutva, whatever it is. You feel like this could be different, right? And you might just vote on that hope, even though it doesn't end up happening in reality. You could just replace one set of dollars with another set of dollars. sort of what I think even was the hope that drove TMC in the beginning, and it has now morphed into that. So, I mean, without going too much into West Bengal politics,
Sure.
I guess people might feel that we have suffered enough at the hands of these AIDMK guys.
Yeah.
This is the corruption that has like it has, and as in anecdotally, there's no easy way to measure it, but
Sure.
anecdotally, there's a sense that ever since the EPS OPS duo took over, that Paneerselvam and Palaniswamy took over, that they don't have as much strict control on their party that Jayalalitha had,
Sure.
or maybe even a Stalin has at the moment.
Yeah.
So people have run riot. That the leaders have
It's
run
just,
riot.
yeah,
And same,
I mean, Karnanidhi found a good successor and Jayalalitha didn't find one.
well, Karnataka made his own successor,
Yeah.
but
Made his,
it
yeah.
wasn't an easy succession process. Let's
Sure.
also keep in mind that
The
another
elder
factor
brother.
which may have played a role. Yeah, Adagiri. Let's also keep in mind that even up to 2016, there was a lot of, I mean, it started in late 2000s, the first decade of 2000, I think.
Sure.
To the mid 2000s, there was still resentment over the fact that why has Stalin been chosen as the presumptive leader of the party. And Aragiri still possibly harbored hopes of making a comeback at some point, but all of that has now been foreclosed. It's now Stalin through and through.
Sure.
Stalin is the one who's got full control of the party, who's full leadership of the party.
Yeah.
Then, and if the Lok Sabha elections are any guide to what will happen in the state, I think Enram may be right. They could just sweep and get 80-90% of the seats. The coalition, the DMK coalition, not personally DMK. They're contesting only 179 seats.
What is the ideology like? Is there an ideology in Tamil Nadu? The top two parties, like for example, if the DMK is like going with NDA, it's not necessarily a right wing, is it? Or is DMK necessarily a left wing? What is their where do they stand on, like, you can call it as political spectrum in that sense?
I think if you have to plot Indian political parties on a spectrum, you can't have a two-dimensional spectrum. You will need, and I hope physics people will forgive me. You might need more than two dimensions.
Sure.
You may need 9 dimensions, right? If you can imagine a 9-dimensional spectrum, maybe then you'll be able to plot Indian political parties, because there is, I mean, if you just take even the traditional two axes of political spectrum, right? There is, of course, an idea of a social. You can be a cultural left-wing person or an economic right-wing person and so on, but these terms lose their meaning when you break it down at the state level in India. You may find that a quote-unquote, like, you have to not just look at issues relating to economics or culture. You may also have to look at deep issues of caste, deep issues of religion, which don't easily map on two ends of a spectrum.
Sure.
They may map on multiple ends of a spectrum. So and it's a lot of it is relative. So, for instance, in Kerala, the Congress is the right-wing party. The BJP doesn't have as much space in Kerala, partly because the Congress occupies that right. It's not a centrist party by any means.
Yeah.
It is the conservative party, right? It is the social conservatives, which is a favored party of social conservatives across religions. Across religions, like Kerala doesn't have any. I mean, there are majority Hindus, but you also have sizable Muslim and Christian politics, Christian voters, population, and for them, they may prize social conservatism more than the fact that they may be economically right or left or whatever it is. So, which is where I think it is very relative. Each party takes a different color depending on the state which it finds itself in. So you can't. I mean, it's much more complex. I think Rahul Verma has this book on ideology and Indian voters do go on ideology, but let's not understand ideology in a left-right or a spectrum or on just two axes. I think Indian politics exists on multiple axes. People choose their parties on multiple axes. And at the end of the day, no one knows exactly why the Indian voter votes in a certain way. All of us are wise after the fact. And at most, we may say, okay, they might win this many seats or this many percentage of votes, but we don't have a coherent theory. Nobody has come up with a coherent theory of why the Indian voter votes the way she does. And maybe there isn't one coherent theory, that maybe we have to break it down to each state and understand the politics and the history of the state, the culture of the state, to understand, to really get why people voted a certain way in a certain election,
Sure.
rather than a bigger, broader argument about ideology or whatever it is. So,
Yeah,
which is where I think, which is
because
where I think it doesn't really help that way.
yeah, because since now BJP is trying to dip its toes in Tamil Nadu. Back in the day, Anna DMK, NDA, DMK, NDA alliance. BJP was not that hardcore Hindu. It was a hardcore Hindutva all along, but it was kind of a moderate-ish even before 2010, 14. But now, having coming with this strong nationalistic narrative, how does that affect voter of NDA in Tamil Nadu? Is that going to be a factor at all, or it has literally no place?
I don't think so. I don't think it
Yeah.
will have that much place. I think people will still vote or not vote for the AIDMK based on the AIDMK alliance based on the AIDMK's performance, because
Yeah.
by far it is the party in larger seats. And even if you agree with the BJP's politics, at the end of the day, you're dealing with the AIADMK legislator. You're not
Yeah.
dealing with Modi. And
Yeah.
on Twitter, maybe you might get a retweet or somebody might respond to you. But for a day-to-day basis, to help you navigate the state or to get something that you're entitled to from the state, you're in contact with your local legislator. You're
Sure.
not so much concerned with it. And it's one of those rare instances, I suppose, where the BJP is got 20 seats as opposed to the 179 seats of the. There have been junior partners in other coalitions, but not here to the extent where they can't, like, they don't have, they just don't have the kind of cadre or this thing to be able to make that kind of a difference. So
Sure.
I'd say that, I suppose if I have to be extremely cynical about it, I'd say the BJP will have as much impact on the Tamil Nadu elections as the CPM will. So, which is maybe interesting, maybe significant, but not overwhelming that it will push people away dramatically. Tamil Nadu does have a sizable Christian and Muslim population, but it's not like in West Bengal, which is 30%.
Sure.
Right. So which is where and you have different dynamics also in terms of the caste, in terms of the ideology and so on. So which is why I really don't see
what should a national party possibly do, right? For example, to at least come to a sizable, like kingmaker size party in a state like Tamil Nadu or Kerala 20 years down the line, 10 years down the line. What can it possibly do? Is it just
stop
too
being
hopeless?
a national party?
Yeah.
Stop being a national party.
Right.
No, and I say that for the reason that as a national party, you are thinking of your platform, your positions, your thoughts, your cadre from a national perspective. You want to compete in whatever 29 states or 30 states or plus all the union territories.
Yeah.
So you're thinking of it in that terms. Tamil Nadu voters demand that you think in Tamil Nadu terms first before you vote for the national thing. And there's a very interesting book by Pragya Singh, which talks about how identity plays a role in welfare.
Sure.
That across India, in different states, more people. So it's about whether you identify yourself as your regional linguistic identity or do you identify yourself on your caste identity. And what she finds is that in Kerala and in Tamil Nadu, you find a higher incidence of people identifying on their Malayali or Tamil identity more than their caste identity. Whereas in the northern states like UP and Bihar, it's more caste and nobody calls themselves from Uttar Pradesh or from Bihar. And if you've seen that stand-up routine where Sanjay Rajana says, "Oh, I'm people from Uttar Pradesh. Haath niche kar, घर पे कोई बात नहीं है." So that kind of stuff. So which is where that kind of cultural thing also feeds into how people see themselves, and it informs politics also. It informs politics in the way that you feel that if a measure benefits other Tamils, I'm happy with it. Maybe my caste may benefit only 10%, other caste may benefit 15-20%, but I see them all as Tamil, so it's okay, right? And if I basically vote for a party which wants to do good by Tamils.
Sure.
right? And Tamils, because and I don't particularly care of how if it's a good measure in Uttar Pradesh or not. I see this as something that helps Tamils. But whereas in maybe in the northern India or in other states where there is much more deeper caste divisions, you sort of will likely to veto a measure. When I say veto, I mean you use your vote to
Sure.
veto a measure which might benefit another caste 15% and you just 10%, and focus on the people who will maximize your caste, your kin,
Sure.
getting the benefits as opposed to everybody else, because you're like, they're ex caste. I don't have any other identity with them beyond the fact.
Sure.
Maybe I'm quote unquote Hindu, but at the end of the day, I will still see caste because I see them as part of this particular caste. And so in that way, religion could be another thing which the BJP is popping up as an identity, which you sort of say that as long as all the Hindus are getting it, I'm okay. But that I think is only true maybe for a small percentage of upper castes, or rather for upper caste groups. And I mean upper caste groups in terms of Brahmin, Banyas, and a few other groups, rather than generally across OBCs or generally across backward castes in that sense.
Sure.
So backward caste, Dalits, and so on. So which is why I think national parties will have to stop being national parties if they want to prosper in Tamil Nadu. And there was a sound, not chance, but an attempt at doing so in the context of Karnataka. I of course come back to Karnataka because I'm a bit more familiar with the examples and all of that. The Congress in 2018 in the assembly elections tried to fight the BJP by pitching themselves to be more of a regional party than a national party. In terms of the Kannada flag, in terms of like the movement to have more Kannada on metro and symbols, and the kinds of issues that Siddaramaiah took up. The attempt was to sort of, but there is like the Kannada identity is not really as strong as the Tamil identity. Maybe there's, I mean, I don't know if there's exact data on it, and if somebody can point out, can say this, but the diversity between North Karnataka, right? If you take the topmost, so the northernmost district to the all the way to the southernmost district, is, in my view, almost as great as the diversity between North India and South India. In every way possible, economically, socially, historically, linguistically. I mean, we for the namesake or this entire state as a thing of Kannada, but if you try and the Kannada, if you listen to the Kannada of the coast, it's very different from the Kannada of the south. It's very different from the Kannada of like the Bombay Karnataka part, and very different from the Kannada of the Hyderabad Karnataka part. And they're all dismissed as quote unquote dialects. But you see the kinds of differences that emerge in the way in which people talk.
My friend said North Karnataka Kannada is as different as Telangana Telugu. It's just
it is. It pretty much is. So in that way, that attempt to regionalize Congress fell flat because people will still vote as Vokkaligas, Lingayats, Kurubas, and other castes more than they vote as
Kannadigas.
So Kannadigas, right? So which is where whereas regional identity plays a big role in the way that Tamil Nadu elections happen, and probably to an extent. And of course, definitely Telangana, because there's a movement for that state. If Karnataka's experience is anything to go by, once the state is created for linguistic purposes, the movement dissipates. So once the unified Karnataka state was created after the reorganization of states, there hasn't been like a serious. I mean, there has been the Gokak agitation in the 60s. You've had the Kaveri agitation in South Karnataka. You have sub-regional agitations, but nothing which can sort of unite all Kannadigas across caste and other barriers to say we are standing as Kannadigas. So that identity doesn't exist. Whereas it's much stronger in Tamil Nadu. It's much stronger in Tamil Nadu because that identity was also pitched as an anti-Brahmin identity. Because it was pitched as we, the original inhabitants of this state, are being discriminated by these outsiders. So very loose terms. Who have come here and imposing their Sanskrit identity on us, whereas we Tamils have a much greater, longer culture, which we need to be proud of, and we need to unite irrespective of our caste. So that is a very different kind of movement from, say, even the movement which created Karnataka or the movement which created Andhra. Like its social and historical, imagination was very different. So which is why that politics having evolved over the years, and given that the parties, which are currently in play, can trace their history back to that kind of movement,
Sure.
suggests that it's a very different politics in play. It's not something that can easily be understood on the axis of national politics.
Sure. Last two questions. One question is just
Sure.
parallel history. If you can play fictional history,
Hmm.
if Jayalalitha was around,
Yeah.
would this have been a much closer fight than it looks right now?
I don't think so.
Mm.
I honestly don't think so, because innately, I think even when they won in 2016, I think the AIDMK would have believed that there is no way we're repeating this a third time, right? Secondly, you are dealing with a very organized and well-resourced opposition
Sure.
in the DMK. Third, the DMK has shown what it is capable of in the 2019 Lok Sabha elections, right? But I think they won 39 out of 40 or
All
38 out of some, almost,
sweep,
I
I
think
guess.
all 40 out of 40. They swept the state,
Yeah.
right? They've shown what they're capable of. They've shown that this is what we can do. So so that would have confirmed to anybody who had any doubts that yes, 2021 is not going to be good for us. I don't think so. And I also think that, you need to renew and rejuvenate yourself as a party to stay relevant for longer and longer periods of time. I didn't see that happening with AIDMK in any real way. It's I mean, there are people who sort of on Twitter and other places sort of say that DMK is a cadre-based party and AIDMK is a bunch of fan clubs brought together. But you don't just win elections on the basis of active fan clubs.
Sure.
You do you need to have those networks. You need to have them in place.
Sure.
And I get the sense that those networks have been exhausted. I think people would have said, for whatever better or worse, we need change.
Yeah.
And that changes. And Tamil Nadu has, I think, except maybe MGR when he pulled off, I think, 2 consecutive election victories. Jayalalitha was the next to do that. Nobody, as far as I can recall, unless you go all the way back to the 50s of Congress, I don't think anyone has pulled off 3 consecutive.
No
and by the way, even
no
no hat tricks. Right, even the very first election, I'm writing a piece on it. We talk about, the BJP sort of using all unconstitutional measures to form state government. 1952, when the first Tamil Nadu election and the Madras state elections happened, the Congress wasn't the single largest party. It didn't have more than the halfway mark. A combination of communist, socialist, and caste parties got together and submitted letters to the governor to say, we have majority. They did. Numerically, they did. We have majority. You should swear us in. The governor didn't. The governor swore in C. Rajgopalachari of the Congress, who wasn't even an MLA. So he said, you form the government, you prove the majority. And he gave him like months to prove the majority.
Wow.
In which time the Congress slowly broke away that other alliance until a couple of years later, Rajgopalachari quit and Kamraj became CM. And of course, then there was no Bombay judgment and courts are like, sorry, this is all political. We don't know what to do over that. And you're like, yeah, this sounds familiar, right? A Congress governor using his powers to ensure a Congress government is formed by hook or crook, whether or not the Congress has the majority, started in Tamil Nadu, 1952, all the way back in 1952. So, which is where I think we have to sort of understand that it's very rare for parties to be given long rope, as in say a Bihar, where they've won multiple elections across periods of time. And like with Kerala, and I think so with Tamil Nadu, I think people like the change. And because of our first past proposed system, where you have only when you have only 2 major alliances and groups in play, small swing away, even a small swing away, means the others thing. Which is why I think maybe 2016 was an aberration, and it looks increasingly that 2016 was the aberration. Even if I have to play alternate history, if a Jayalalitha were definitely alive, I do think there would have been a certain sense of exhaustion. There would have been a certain sense of weariness with AIDMK within the party as well and outside it as well. And people would have said, look, the DMK is turning a new leaf. Stalin he may be good, he may be bad, but he deserves a chance. And this is an organized party. It has promised us this. I suppose the DMK's plan could have been anti-Hindutva, anti-BJP, irrespective of whether AIDMK was part of it.
Yeah.
So I feel that would have sort of fit into the larger ideologies of the larger ideology on the basis of which Tamil voters vote. And I think they would have maybe margin might have been different, subject to what the eventual outcome is.
Yeah.
But I honestly don't think it would have been very different.
So that is exactly why I also think that, first of all, AIDMK has stayed one term too many already, all right, which is like such a rarity. And then on top of that, the way they handled Jayalalitha's death was totally did not go down well with the Tamil public. I was literally in Chennai when she died, and I was a part of that conversation. I was working there. Part of that conversation, and also the Jallikattu movement. All these are in great memory, and I think it's a foregone conclusion as well. It's pretty much a clean sweep, in my opinion, as well. I think probably one of the largest clean sweeps you would see in the recent history of assembly election. Maybe even I go as far as down there to predict that. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, we have a hard record to beat with the Aam Aadmi Party, 157 out of 60 in 2015.
Sure.
And then we've had Sikkim in a few years ago prior to that, where I think they won also they won like 90%.
Let's just talk about a state which has 4 crore population.
Yeah, a major state. I think closest in the recent history might have been Uttar Pradesh in 2017. The BJP won, I think, 3/4 majority, if I'm not mistaken. 300. That was also more than 3/4, if I'm not mistaken. They won, I think, 300 plus in UP. But it could even be bigger than what TRS won. I think not in this election, just the previous election.
Yes.
Previous election. So I think, it could be one of the largest. Maybe the alliance as a whole, not maybe just BMK alone.
Sure.
It could be close to 200, if not more, out of 220.
I really wonder.
234 seats.
Yeah, I really wonder about the future of Fanna DMK after this. I mean, that's going to be very interesting.
Great point. It's a great point, and I think that is where the action will shift, because I see that there is EPS and OPS, and then there is Shasikala, who temporarily has backed off, because my sense is that I guess he sees this is a loser. There's nothing that I gain to be part of this. Let them own the failure. Let
me not be a part of this failure. I'll come back when the fruit is ripe.
When the fruit is. So I guess that's probably sort of her plan. Maybe waiting for 2026 when the next election takes place.
Sure.
So, which is and her nephew in PTV Dinakaran, they're fighting as a separate alliance or whatever. Maybe they just want to show that we're still around. But I think the eventual gameplay is let the AIDMK really collapse in this particular election. And then we'll sort of pick it up from scratch afterwards. I think that's probably the play here. But let's see how the vote goes, and let's see what the eventual margins are.
Well, very interesting election ahead, folks. That's it from this podcast. I hope you had great insights. Thank you very much, Alok, for joining this podcast. A fun chat.
Absolutely. My pleasure, Najeeb.
Deep into the Tamil history. There is a lot more to explore, but we have touched a cup of a surface, maybe.
Yes.
That's it from the podcast, ladies and gents. Till we see you next time with another episode. Bye, everyone.